Well, with all that's going on in the U.S. marijuana industry, especially the lack of inclusion, there's lots to talk about with our next guest, AC Braddock. She's the CEO of Eden Labs, which specializes in extraction and distillation technology for the cannabis industry, and chair of the National Cannabis Industry Association. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, when entrepreneurs were beginning to navigate this space, the playing field appeared even. But who are the leaders in the industry now?
That depends on how you define leadership. Fairly often in our culture, we define leadership by financial gain. In this industry that is built on health and wellness and compassion and solving cultural ills, leadership is defined very differently. And those leaders are generally found in advocacy groups and organizations or extremely well-defined mission-led companies.
And as we look at some of the leadership roles, I mean, we see that the top 20 cannabis companies include just 2 female CEOs and very few women directors. Why are women and minorities largely absent when it comes to these business leadership roles?
Why are women absent in many leadership roles across any industry? 33 women are CEOs in the Fortune 500. You know, this isn't a cannabis problem. It's a systemic throughout our culture, not our culture, but around the world. As far as the number of female executives in the cannabis industry, there are very definitive things that do lead to that problem.
And we did see that according to Marijuana Business Daily, in 2015, 36% of pot executives in Colorado were women, but then 2 years later that dropped to 27% as we saw some of these bigger corporations and Wall Street investments entering the fray. So as you mentioned, how does this story compare to what we see in other sectors, specifically tech, where we are seeing women and minorities being left behind?
Well, this industry grew from, again, health and wellness, and from that, and because there's no banking. So it allowed many different kinds of groups of people to be able to come in without depending on banking to be able to do a startup. So that led to a lot of craft industry from the get-go. What happened was, as the industry grew exponentially, more and more money came in private equity, but of the $58 million that men generally get in investment money, women get $1 million. So that automatically starts knocking off women and minorities out of the equation. So that number has dropped precipitously, and I'm sure at this point it's in the low 20s.
And we're also seeing the same thing happening with CBD, a derivative of marijuana, especially in beauty products. And that industry is expected to generate about $25 billion and be responsible for 15% of total skincare industry in the next decade. We're already seeing luxury retailers, Barney's and Neiman Marcus, investing. But again, women of color are being priced out of CBD, not just as business owners, but also users of the products because of the higher costs and the lower earnings they're bringing in. Are there any initiatives to try and create a fairer playing field?
Yes, absolutely. This one of the nice things about being a woman in this industry, and especially for myself, for instance, in tech, is that these conversations are always top of mind. Like, how are we going to cure these social ills that were formulated by prohibition, which we are still in? And the National Cannabis Industry Association and the Minority Cannabis Industry Association have been working closely on initiatives to do this. And there are amendments to the Safe Banking Act that deal specifically with this issue. And a lot of it just has to do, the cornerstone of all this entire problem is that is prohibition, and that we need to deschedule. If we just descheduled, most of these problems would go away, expungements would be able to occur, and then we'd have banking and there would be much greater access, because within the culture of this industry, it is a very important issue.
And as we know, it's not federally legal, but cannabis is being increasingly normalized. We are seeing it at the state level. But advocates say that people of color are often reluctant to join the growing legal marijuana economy because they were targeted, arrested, prosecuted, and jailed far more often than their white counterparts during the war on drugs. How can that trust be regained so that it becomes a more inclusive industry?
It takes a concerted effort by the people who were not targeted, and to be inclusive and start actively working at legislative issues and licensing access.
And are there any models that you can look at in terms of perhaps that the U.S. could follow to make this a more inclusive and diverse industry?
I think that this industry is the model. I really can't think of another industry that is more focused on diversity and social equity than this industry is, because prohibition was devastating to thousands of people, and it was, started by a few men in the 1900s, and we are still living under the misinformation that they spread through their propaganda on this plant, and thousands of people have suffered, and whole communities have been destroyed because of it. It's an epidemic, and the industry realizes this and are fighting for this.
AC Braddock there, CEO of Eden Labs and chair of the National Cannabis Industry Association.